he got in 1793 permission from the town to build a dam across the cove to create a tidal mill.
But what makes this interesting is that it was utilizing a new kind of technology. And the wheel would be here, attached to the side of the building. It's about 25 feet in diameter. And here's a picture. You can see what it looked like. This whole building is one big machine, and everything is interconnected. And you got a tremendous view from up here. This thing is called a smutter. Smut is like a fungus that grows on the outside of the wheat.
My three great-grandfather actually owned at one point 50% of the mill.
Here is the whole assemblage, all the mill furniture in one place. And what's interesting here is you have the name A. Van Wyck.
Why is it important to preserve a place like this?
And so we know where we've come from, what used to exist. It can teach us a lot of useful lessons, even though it's 230 years old.
Welcome to the Gold Coast of Long Island. It's home to plenty of castles, mansions, and estates. It also has plenty of ruins and historic relics. In this video, I'm visiting one such place, which still stands as a testament to American ingenuity, the Lefferts Tide Mill. What is going on, guys? I am here in Puppy Cove today on the North Shore of Long Island. I have the unique opportunity to visit the Lefferts Tide Mill, which is the only mill in the United States that still sits on its original foundation, and it has most of its original parts still intact. Another interesting fact about it is that it was the third patent ever issued in the United States, and that was for a new way of processing wheat and corn. So I'm going to learn more about that today, along with its history, as well as the preservation efforts that are surrounding it. So with that, let's take it away. You're okay if this is recording, right? I'm just filming them do whatever you want. Yeah.
We're going to start the tour, the George McKesson Brown Boathouse. I usually point out to everybody that comes on the tour. That's a county park now. It was built as a Gold Coast estate in 1911. There was an early grist mill that the Sammis family owned at the end of this cove. There was no dam here, but Coles Wortman, who had married a daughter of the Van Wycks, the Van Wycks owned most of this 500 acres that surround here, married Coles Wortman, one of the daughters, Sarah, and he got in 1793 permission from the town to build a dam across the cove to create a tidal mill. And when we get out on the dam, we'll explain more how that provided the power for the mill. The earlier grist mill that the Sammis family ran was stream fed off of water that came down from the hills above. Well, Van Wortman and Sarah, his wife, built a farmhouse in 1790 or so that's on the right-hand side as we're coming in, that big yellow house. Now, the original house would have been the center part of it, and the house was eventually bought by John Rogers Maxwell, who was the vice president of the Long Island Railroad, and he bought it to really tear down the old farmhouse and to build a Gold Coast mansion there. But when he got here, he decided now that he would enlarge the farmhouse rather than tear it down. And so there it still stands. It's been enlarged by Maxwell, by the wings both on the right and the left.
So, Toby, I have to ask you, so right now we're in Puppy Cove.
We're in Puppy's Cove.
How did that get its name?
Good question. There are a lot of, young whales were called puppies, but I don't think there were any whales up in this area. After the mill stopped operation in 1870, it was bought by the Schoik family, and they bought the Miller's house and a number of other houses around here, including the original Sammis house, which stands on Southdown Road. And the Van Schoiks that lived in the Sammis house raised dogs. And so I think that's where the Puppy Coves comes from, back in the early 20th century.
Yeah.
So now we're arriving at the 1794. It was originally built by the Van Wyck family, but they sold it in 1798 to a more Miller-oriented family, which were the Lefferts. one of the grandsons of the Van Wyck who lived here became mayor of New York.
Thank you. Hey,
Now-
how are you? Hi, John. Nice to meet you, Rich.
Yeah, Rich is part of the group here, and he actually lives in that Samus house that I was talking about.
Oh, wow, okay.
Just coming off, watch where you're stepping.
So this is like a little local gem.
It is.
Yeah.
It really is.
Do a lot of people know about this spot?
Not as many as we'd like, but we're trying to share it with the public because it is such an important historic site. The Historical Society runs the tours, and they go out about every 2 weeks.
Yeah,
Do those tours
Yeah.
feel like a lot of interest?
yeah,
or-
right.
Yes, yeah.
One bee doesn't.
Yeah, they
do
sell
it.
out.
If
I mean,
get
we're limited to the
right,
number of people who can fit on the launch,
like if I went open the window and I
but they
stepped on
fill
that
out
thing,
every time we do it.
Okay.
So I like to start here because this is to explain what a tide mill is. You know, a mill is just something we're building to do some work, whether it's grinding grain, cutting wood as a sawmill, as woolen mills, there's all sorts of different things. But you need a power source, and you have a wheel that turns pushed by water. And often it's stream fed, and you dam up the stream, create a pond, and then you let the water out as you like. This is different because it's a tide mill, which is not depending on a stream, it's depending on the tides, which are never going to fail because every day there's two high tides. So this is the tide gate. So this is where the water flows in to fill up the mill pond. When they put the dam here, it was mapped out and really determined where to put the dam and how high to build it so that you would have the correct amount of water surface in here to feed the mill at the power that you'd need to fill. They would have had, back when this was operating, a tide gate which flips up as the tide's coming in, but then when the tide turns, it's going to flip down and the pressure is going to hold it. And here's a picture to show you how that works.
It's like a big flapper.
So this was something that they mastered in the 1700s.
Well, actually, even before that.
Yeah.
Tide mills have been around for hundreds and hundreds of years, you know, even going back probably 1,000 years.
Yeah.
But what makes this interesting, and we'll talk about that when we get over to the mill,
Yeah.
is that it was utilizing a new kind of technology, a new system that had just been invented in the 1790s. 1785. The third patent issued by the United States government to an inventor named Oliver Evans, and it was for his new system of an automated mill. Okay. So the way this works now, the water comes in, and it would have closed off, and then it would have come out through the sluice gate to turn the wheel.
Right.
That is now blocked off. So currently the water, this is two-way traffic here through this water. And more than just a historic site, this is a bird sanctuary. So we do see a lot of birds. I don't see any right now, but we get herons and egrets, and of course geese and ducks. All right, let's walk over to the other side. It's funny, there's so many people we bring on tours, and they just don't, they can't
You know, we should be able to
comprehend the concept that this is a dam,
And I think I don't know.
that this is not natural land.
What do they?
I don't know what they're thinking.
Okay.
It's like, no, this is man-made. And I think that's almost as incredible as the mill itself.
But
Is that
we ought to spend
this is a dam that
we
was
have
built 230 years ago, and it's still doing what it's supposed
Yeah,
to do.
right.
The mill in Stony Brook, which a lot of people are familiar with, that's been updated
Right.
continually over the years. And it's not a tide mill.
That's a grist mill. I think that's.
It's a grist
Well,
mill,
it's a
but
grist
this
mill.
is a grist mill
This is a-
too.
Okay.
Tide mill refers to how it's powered.
Right. Okay.
This is powered by the tides. So as something that's powered by the tides, you know you have a window to operate every day, but you don't necessarily operate the entire time between the high tide and the low tide. You're only going to drop 1 foot from the mill pond because you need a significant enough difference, and that's enough to operate the mill for about 2 or 3 hours.
I mean, one of the things that is amazing about this is that, and it's hard to imagine it here, but you were familiar with the area. There's no water in front of this mill
At low tide.
at low tide.
Right.
So you're dealing with almost an 8-foot fall of tide. You know, that gives you a waterfall.
This is low tide.
That's low tide. Okay.
So you can see the whole extent of the dam. I talked about the sluice gate. This is where the water would leave the pond and go back into the harbor. So where the gravel is blue, imagine the blue is water. That's why we use blue stones, to give you that idea.
Yeah.
But it would have been open there and open here. And this would have had sort of a gate that there would be a capstone and you would turn it and raise the gate up to let the water out once you had that differential between the pond and the harbor. And the wheel would be here, attached to the side of the building. It's about 25 feet in diameter, big wheel. And here's a picture. You can see what it looked like.
Right. Okay. So same angle. That's where the wheel was. What happened to the wheel over time?
Over time,
Yeah.
you know, after the mill stopped being used and this was private property, they seemed to use this as, you know, a storage place, a clubhouse. Kids would come here and dive off the wheel into the water, and that would start to break down some of those paddles on the wheel. And eventually it just disappeared. I don't think we know exactly when.
No, we don't know exactly when, but it just got dangerous, and therefore, you know, they decided to take it down at some point.
So once they had that differential, and they would open this up, and the water would shoot out and start to turn the wheel around. And that's what turned the gears inside, and that's the part that makes this mill unique.
Yeah, it's an undershot wheel. So you raise this up a bit so the water scoots underneath it and hits the paddles, so the wheel will turn this way, counterclockwise. It's simple in the sense that it gives you horizontal rotation.
Okay.
But now when you think about what has to happen, it has to change to vertical rotation. So there has to be a transmission of the power, and that's what this gear house is that we're going to look at provides.
So as we step in here, we're really stepping into an 18th century machine. This whole building is one big machine, and everything is interconnected and made to work a particular task. And as Toby said, the wheat or the corn is going to start up on the 3rd floor and then wind its way down and then go back up to the 2nd floor and then up to the 3rd floor and back to here. And we'll try to explain that. We're not going to go up and down the stairs all the time, but you'll get a sense of how it works. These are the gears that were turned by that water wheel. So there would be a shaft coming in, and it would connect to this wallower and turn the wallower, the big one in the middle, and then there are 2 on the sides. There's a pit wheel on top that has the little protrusions and fits into 2 wallowers on either side. Those are what operate the millstones that we'll see up on the 2nd floor. What makes this unique is that this mill has a 3rd wallower over here, and that's what operates all the automation of all the other functions other than grinding the grain itself. And that's back in the corner. And not the one right here, but right behind it. I'm not sure if you can get a good view of it from here.
Yeah. And this is all original?
That's all original.
Wow. That's amazing that it's this, like, preserved, this intact.
After the Civil War, you had more efficient steam-powered mills in places like Patchogue and Port Jefferson in the Midwest. So this mill did not become economically viable at that point, so it never got updated. That's why we still have the original wooden gears here.
And this is where you get your transmission of power, what I talked about. You got your wheel providing
Right.
horizontal power,
Yeah.
and that hooks into this pit wheel here, that hooks into the wallower, which is that also has a pit wheel on top of it that runs the 2 smaller, or the 3 smaller wallowers, really, and transmits your gear to a vertical, and that's what grinds the wheat.
Okay. Does this still turn? Like, is this still operational?
It'll still turn, but it's no longer operational, and I
Okay.
don't think we want it to be operational.
Right.
You got to treat this as an antique piece of
Sure.
furniture. You don't sit on it.
And I hope this all makes sense, because as I said, the wheat starts on the 3rd floor. It's going to come down to here on different journeys. It's going to fall into the millstones and get ground into flour. And when it's done being ground into flour, it's going to come down this chute. This is the chute for one millstone, and here's the chute for the other. And as it comes here, it's wet and hot, so it needs to be dried out and cooled. So we want to send it back up to the 3rd floor to do that. And to do that, we have an Archimedes screw. This would have been in a wooden trough, but this would turn and send the flour down over to here, and there would have been an elevator here. An elevator is just a series of cups on a leather belt
Right.
that would catch it and bring it all the way up to the 3rd floor. So you'd come down, cross, and all the way back up. You want to control a couple of different things: how fast the wheat goes into the millstones, and how far apart the millstones are from each other, because that controls how fine your flour is.
And if you come over here, you see how this thing is, you see the slot in there on that new piece of timber there, and by lifting that up, this slot will lift that horizontal beam, which will adjust the distance, because this is what controls how far the upper millstone is from the lower millstone.
Yeah.
So if you want to adjust that distance, you adjust this lighter staff,
Okay.
your weight on your lighter staff.
And then if you want to adjust how fast your flour is coming in and out, you can pull this rope, which we'll see upstairs and what it's connected to. And that will adjust the speed in which the wheat comes down. And this mill would grind both wheat and corn. And the wheat, as I said, comes out hot and wet and has to be cooled and dried. Corn does not have that issue. So the corn would come in and come down this chute and not go back
Settle out
up.
for the corn.
And it can come right back down
Right.
and into the barrels directly.
Right. Just get a close-up shot of.
You can head up to the third floor, as I said, and start from the beginning. This is Abraham Van Wyck Jr. It was his uncle slash father-in-law, because he married his cousin, who he and his uncle father-in-law purchased this from Coles Wortman. His grandson was Robert Van Wyck, who was the first mayor of Consolidated New York, Greater New York, when all the boroughs came together.
Right.
That's who the expressway is named after. We had called it Van Wyck, Lefferts, Tide Mill, and Sanctuary, and we just thought that name was kind of long and cumbersome. And the Van Wycks were sort of in and out pretty quickly in a matter of 5 years. So we've shortened it just to the Lefferts Tide Mill. Jarvis Lefferts was from a milling family. Some of the Lefferts were millers in Brooklyn. And he was also a builder. And this was, not his full-time occupation, but he owned the mill and he operated it. Now this is a neat picture. I don't know if we have a year on it, but here's the mill and the mill pond, and just see the sheep grazing, where now there's all the houses.
And the year has to be after 1911, because this is the Ferguson Castle that was on East Shore Road. And that was built in 1911.
And you got a tremendous view from up here.
Okay.
I knew you had it for summer, but I didn't
Yeah,
know you
right.
just kept out the windows.
This would be some of the pulleys and machines that are run by that auxiliary wallower coming from the first floor. And you would have a pulley that would bring the wheat up here to be unloaded and stored. And then from there, it is taken over to one of these two hoppers. There's one on the floor and one up here. And you'd feed it in, and you would turn this big thing that looks like a bingo basket, and that would clear out some of the, maybe rocks and pebbles that got mixed in during harvesting.
Right.
And the wheat would fall on the outside, and then it would go down to the first floor. And this hopper, there's one of these under this floor, so it's the same process.
Gotcha. Okay.
And this is for the corn, and this is for the wheat.
Probably.
This was for the
Yeah.
corn, this was for the wheat. And the thing that these gears are all going to turn powered by the water wheel. And we'll see those gears on the second floor. Belts would go between this and another pulley, I guess, that would turn that.
What happens is it goes through that
Right.
sorter, the bingo basket, and then it comes up in this elevator. And it would have originally just fed back down into a hopper, which goes into the millstones. But later on, they invented this thing. It's called the smutter, which removes the smut. Smut is like a fungus that grows on the outside of the wheat. You don't want that mixed in with your flour. So this is a later addition, a more technologically advanced way of cleaning the wheat. And this is, when we talk about the elevator, this is one of the cups that would be attached to
So this is one of the cups that would
That's attached to the belt.
a leather belt.
take the corn back up to the.
That
Take
would-
it up
Yeah.
wherever you
That
need to
moves
go
it up, right, elevates it.
So then here it comes up on this side and spills down, and then through this tube into the smutter.
Into the smart. Okay.
I don't know if it's open over here. You could take a maybe.
It's up here. You'd
Yeah,
have
you
to
could
see it
see
up here, but you got to be
the
careful
belt.
So
about
it
the
would
beat.
sort of come up
and
Yeah,
dump
the cup is like
yeah,
this and go over
and dump it
spill,
into that area,
and then
it's-
go down.
yeah.
And over 50 years, there's been various restoration efforts. So there's a lot of equipment that's sort of been shoved in the corner and put here and there.
Yeah.
And we're still trying to piece it all together. We've made a lot of progress, but there's still more things to figure out.
So when you guys started working with the tide mill, how much information on its history was available? Is that something that you guys had to sort of dig for, or was it sort of readily available?
Well,
from
there was
the firearms?
Historic engineering.
historic engineering report that was done in 1975 that came out to look at the mill. They knew it existed, and I'll read you some of the quotes that they wrote about it. So we had all that information. We pretty much also had information on the ownership of it, because the ownership, it was built by the Van Wycks. They owned the land originally. They sold 50% of, they sold 50% of it to,
Two different owners, wasn't it? Two different guys?
well, there were shares of four. There were four shares. Two of them, I think, went to the Lefferts, and then the other two shares were sold as investments for people in town to make it,
Including
Dr. Kassam,
his
who
great-great-great-grandfather.
was my three great-grandfather, and it's his house that the society owns on Park Avenue.
Okay.
He was
So
a
you have a
doctor in
personal
town.
connection to
So
the
I have
place,
well, I didn't know I had a personal connection to the mill. I knew I had a personal connection to the house, but it was in researching that had been done really, and that I was reading. I didn't find it. That I realized that my three great-grandfather actually owned at one point 50% of the mill. Remember we talked about that elevator that after it was ground, we haven't seen that process because that's on the second
Sure,
floor.
yeah.
But after it was ground, it went into that Archimedes screw down on the first floor and then got into an elevator. And we're not clear exactly, we're pretty sure it came up to the third floor. I mean, this is where the elevator belts would have brought it up. And when we get to the second floor, you'll see a little bit more how it would get here. But it would be brought up here to dry. And they'd spread it out, they'd rake it out, whether that was mechanical or not. Oliver Evans did design a process to do it mechanically. There's a question on whether there's enough room up here for that to have existed, but somehow it got to here, and then it dropped down into the second floor again. You know, the whole marvel of this operation, I think, is the transportation vertically and horizontally. Now, vertically and, both ways, vertically.
Up and down.
Up and down. Down was easy, because most of the time it just fell.
Right.
Getting it back up in the process, which they had to do at least twice. Don't forget, it starts up here, and it has to come back up here to be cleaned. That's true. And then drops down to be ground, and then comes back up to be dried, and then it drops down a couple of
barreled.
levels to be separated, and then into barrels to go off to sea.
Yeah.
So this is where we get to the heart of the operation, where the millstones are. There are two pairs. You have the bed stone and the runner stone. The runner stone is on top. This one is pushed off just so you can see how it all works. This is with the whole assemblage put together on this side.
Gotcha. Okay. So
Now,
that's fully assembled.
some people this is not the stone.
This is not the stone. This
No,
is not original.
the stone is underneath.
Okay.
And it's got this iron band to hold it in place. It's usually not one stone, it's several different stones fitted together.
Right.
This is plaster which was put on to keep it level. You don't want to wobble in your stone as it's turning, so you add and decrease the amount of plaster you have so that it's going to be level as it's running. The bed stone doesn't move. The runner stone is what turns. Now this bar comes up from the gears downstairs that we were talking about that you can raise and lower. And the runner stone on this rind, this thing in here, if you can get a shot of that, that rests on that point.
Gotcha. Okay.
And as that turns, it turns this stone. And the wheat is between it, and you're just grinding it, and it grinds down. You need furrows, so you have to dress the stone. And these are kind of worn away, but you can see this kind of grooves through the stone. And that has to be redressed every now and then. That's why you need to be able to pick this up with the crane and move it out of the way and chip out the furrows again. You do the same thing on this. You'd flip it up and work underneath. Here's the whole assemblage, all the mill furniture in one place. And what's interesting here is you have the name A. Van Wyck. Even though they didn't own it very long, they put their brand on there, on these two horses, and Lefferts never changed it. So it still has all of that. The smudder that we talked about is above this hopper. So after it's desmudded, it would come down, and then you'd shoot it either to this hopper or that hopper over there to feed it in, and it would go down through the middle here and in between the stones to feed the millstones. This is that string that I talked about that you control from downstairs, that you can raise and lower the shoe. So the wheat comes down into the shoe, and then you have the damsel turns and knocks against the shoe to create the vibration that'll make the wheat fall. If you want less, you'd raise this up. If you want more, you lower it down. And that controls how much is going into there. And then you can control it this way, see how close it is to the damsel and how far it is from the damsel. So everything is really controlled from downstairs, but the action really takes place right up here. So, okay, that flour has gone downstairs. Take the elevator up to the third floor. It gets dried and cooled, and then it's going to fall back down and come through the bolter. And the bolter is this shaft. This is only the guts of it, and it would have been lower. We just put it up here so people don't bang their heads on it. But you see these recesses in the floor? That would have been where the bin was held up. The legs that hold up the bin. It's a wooden box. The bolter is inside with paddles coming off, like an Archimedes screw, and covered with silk of some kind. And it would spin it and grade the flour, or sort the flour by different fineness. So you'd have super fine, would be the really good stuff, and then kind of middling stuff, and then you get to bran, and then you get to the stuff that you just give to the horses. And then you would have a huge funnel, and this is the funnel. It's in pieces now. We have to reattach this, but this is two sides of the funnel.
The other two are over
The
here.
other two are over there. And they would feed down back to the first floor where you'd put the flour into barrels. And that is pretty much the whole process. It gets confusing because you're going up and down and in and out. And, I'm not sure everyone always understands what we've explained. But that's why we're always happy to answer questions if anybody has questions on these tours.
How long did the mill operate? So from the 1700s till...
So say 1794 till probably about 1870.
Who owns the mill now?
So the family that bought it in 1882 from Lefferts was Van Scoik, who was the wealthy man who owned a lot of land in this property. It passed down through generations of his family. In the 1960s, it was owned by the de Clairville family. And Gwen de Clairville donated the mill pond, the dam, and the mill building to the Nature Conservancy as a bird sanctuary. And, the mill just happened to come along with it. But the neighbors around the pond really were concerned about the dam and the mill and the pond. So they started a new not-for-profit organization, originally called the Van Wyck Lefferts Tide Mill and Sanctuary, now shortened to the Lefferts Tide Mill and Preserve. And the Nature Conservancy gave that nonprofit organization the property in 2018. And we've undertaken, I guess we're on our third restoration project really at this point, on both the mill. We did a lot of work on the mill and also on the dam. All paid for with private donations and grant funding, no taxpayer dollars.
You guys encountered any artifacts or anything, like either doing any archaeological digs here?
Well, as related to the mill, yes. I mean, we'd find things that all of a sudden they were here, but we had no idea what they were. As far as other facts, there are a couple old bottles that were found in the muck at low tide.
Plenty of equipment and artifacts in the building, and we're slowly discovering what they're used for.
In 1975, the Historic American Engineering Record came out to visit, and they did a lot of the diagrams that we have about what they interpreted to be left here. And his comment, and this is a gentleman by the name of T. Allen Comp, and he was of the National Park Service. He says, in the 7 years I spent as senior historian of the Historic American Engineering Record, the Van Wyck Lefferts Mill still stands out as a remarkable survivor, perhaps the only one of its kind to still remain with so many of its original features. And then he goes on to say, today none survive with the historical integrity found in the Van Wyck Lefferts Mill. The mill is a remnant of a past long vanished from Long Island, our only access to the actual craftsmanship and technology of pre-industrial America.
This is
This was just lying around, and we're trying to figure out what the heck it would be. It looks like a jack. We thought it might have been a jack to jack up a house, if you were going to move a house or something like that. The timber framers working on the restoration upstairs noticed these tenons and the holes, and they match up with this mortise and these holes. So it turns out you can take this, it slides right in. They used bolts, but we took it down just for safekeeping. But this would have hung right here. And then this, you turn it, and this part there would go up or down depending on what you're doing. And the question is what exactly that was for. We think it has something to do with barreling the flour.
okay.
So you have barrels like that over there. You want to get as much flour as you can in. So you wind it down to push the flour in tight. And then you can fill in some more. May have also been used to just get the lid onto the barrel in tight. And another option is it could be a cider press.
A cider press.
There's grew a lot of apples around here in the West Neck area, so you could do that to press the apples to get cider.
Interesting.
But otherwise, it was just sitting around and we had no idea what it was. But now we have at least two
Yeah.
possibilities for what it.
So things like this are sort of popping up all the time. Like
Yeah, they're in the building.
they're in the building. Just the use is sort of a mystery.
Right. Yeah.
Wow.
The more we look
Very
at
good.
it and,
Yeah.
and start thinking about what that could have been used for, we tend to be able to figure it out.
Keeping a place like this preserved, I'm just curious as to your opinions on this, and maybe taking the scope of historic preservation as a whole. Why is that important? Why is it important to preserve a place like this?
Well, it's why it's important to save anything, so we know where we've come from, what used to exist, how we used to do things, and how they still have a lot to teach us. One of the things we'd love to do with this mill is get school children involved, not only to see the historic aspect and learn the history of their community, but we can use it for all sorts of STEM subjects. There's a lot of math and physics involved in operating the mill. And we also would love to get students involved with doing something with hydropower. That's what this was created for. It's hydropower to grind mill, but now we can use that hydropower to create electricity. If we had a little mini generator here. It's one of the ideas we're talking about, trying to get something going. So there's a lot of, it can teach us a lot of useful lessons, even though it's 230 years old.
Okay, that's great. All right, well, that wraps it up. This was a really interesting look at a unique piece of history right in my own hometown, and that's the Lefferts Tide Mill. So a special thank you to Robert and Toby for taking the time to give me a tour of this place. This was really unique.